This is LBC.
Not every all-electric SUV comes with permanent all-wheel drive as standard. But then, not every all-electric SUV is a Subaru. Introducing the Subaru Solterra, our very first fully electric vehicle. All-wheel drive, instant torque, fast charging, and a range of nearly 300 miles. Book a test drive now at subaru.co.uk. Power your adventures in the Subaru Solterra. Range based on test conditions and may vary.
Imagine being this close to a real-life shark. Or hundreds of jellyfish. You don't have to when you visit Sea Life London, because we're home to thousands of sea creatures from all around the globe. As for seahorses that sound like... or a turtle that plays its flippers like a tambourine. Don't hold your breath on those. You'll have to visit to see the real sorts. See the wonder under London at Sea Life London Aquarium.
Hello, Britain. Albert Einstein here. To those of you who have got a smart meter, I applaud you. You are helping to modernize Britain's outdated energy system, helping us use more renewable energy. The downside of doing this message on radio is that you can't see that I'm proudly toasting you with a cup of Earl Grey. But the upside is, you can't see that I'm still in my dressing gown. Cheers.
Search Get a Smart Meter today. Consumer action required. Eligibility may vary.
If you've lost £3,000 or more in a scam or fraud, then tell CEL. CELsolicitors.co.uk specialise in confidential, no-win, no-fee fraud and scam recovery. Whether you were pressured by someone posing as a bank, HMRC or even the police, if you have been scammed, don't let them get away with it. Let us help you try to get your money back. We listen, we care, we win.
This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Welcome back, folks. It's nearly 6:35. I think it's fair to say that almost no Prime Minister in living memory would have handled the last 48 hours like Boris Johnson did. But were his actions typical of who he has always been? Andrew Jimson is my next guest. He's author of Boris, The Making of the Prime Minister. Andrew Jimson, welcome. I'm going to ask you to peer into Boris Johnson's mind, since, as his biographer, you're better placed than most people to try to do that extraordinary action. Can I ask you why you think he has been so determined to hang on over the summer? Because there's all sorts of theories. He's hoping that something will turn up. He's hoping he can find a way of hanging on permanently. You know, he's hoping to dish somebody else. There's some kind of plot going on. What do you think?
I'm not sure there's a plot, but he might see a chance in 1,000, and he's an optimist. Most of us would think a chance in 1,000 isn't much use. Well, he'll immediately, of course, upgrade it to sort of a 10% chance or something, and he knows that in fact he delights in the fact that the future is unpredictable. He's always been very good, both as a journalist and as a politician, at knowing when the story changes in the twinkling of an eye. He can turn on a sixpence, and of course something might turn up. And he's certainly showing, I think, that he's not just... I would be very surprised. I don't know, of course I haven't asked him, but I would be very surprised if he just wants to turn his back on politics and march on. And I mean, of course, he does want to make lots of money, but I think he also wants to remain a big political player. And Gladstone said that former prime ministers are like untethered rafts in harbours, a danger to shipping. He will almost undoubtedly be a danger to shipping.
He's certainly a danger to the Conservative Party. Let me try on you my theory, which I've heard from quite a few people around the place today, which is that what he intends to do is to use the summer to underline what he thinks is his record and his legacy, talk a lot about Brexit, talk a lot about Ukraine, talk a lot about vaccine rollout and so forth, and then just be always lurking behind the shoulders of whichever poor sap becomes Prime Minister next, destabilising them, commenting, just being generally unhelpful, but reminding people that he exists. And if that person loses the next election of the Conservative Party, back Boris bounces.
I think, yes, lurking is possibly not quite the right term, because no one is more inclined, although he can be in some respects very secretive. He of course loves being at the centre of the story. He has a tremendous gift for putting himself at the centre of the story. So he will be I can't think what the right term is, not backseat driver. He'll want to be in the front seat, actually. He'll make a grab.
He'll be grabbing the steering wheel like Donald Trump.
He's not the same as Trump. And he won't be wanting people to march on Westminster and that sort of stuff. I think he realises that would be totally disgraceful. And actually, our system has worked. He has been sacked. I mean, of course, there are as with most sackings, there are arguments about the details, but he has been got rid of, and we can rejoice in this country that we don't have fixed terms. You can't get rid of a useless American president in the way that we have got rid of not of a useless president, but of one who has lost the confidence of so many of his colleagues.
Andrew, you studied his early life and his middle life as a politician. For those who haven't had the enjoyment of reading your book, can you just tell listeners and viewers indeed, what are the essential things they should know about the younger Boris Johnson as he was growing up, which explain the extraordinary events of the last 48 hours?
His parents moved house 32 times before, when he was 14, they got divorced. At the age of 9, his mother had a very, very serious nervous breakdown and was in the Maudsley Hospital for 8 or 9 months. So he had a privileged childhood in some ways. He went to very good schools and he took full advantage of that, and he did Greek before breakfast. And he'd been at the European school, so he also had a sort of cosmopolitan aspect to his life. It wasn't just an English upbringing, it was a European upbringing. He had all this, but he also had great sadnesses as well, and I think did decide as a child to make himself robust and invulnerable, and became, as a result, amazingly resilient and amazingly capable of dealing with blows which would fell most people, and certainly most politicians.
Do you think the fact that he was brought up with a Europhile, multilingual and liberal family background, I mean, he had lots of liberal grandparents, famous figures, reformers and so forth, he has Turkish antecedents as well as American and so on, is it basically a rebellion against his early years that explains his politics now?
No, he very much wants to seduce liberals. And particularly, I mean, politically.
Just be careful
maybe
with your language there,
well, liberal women. His mother, who died recently, was from a tremendous liberal family, and he loves liberals. He doesn't just want to appeal to stern, unbending Tories, though, of course, because he always wants to have his cake and eat it. He actually, I mean, for a time, he assembled a coalition which included examples of both, and he does connect with various constituencies, and it's very difficult. I mean, this is going to be one of the problems for his successor. Will the successor be able to connect with people? Will the atmosphere in the shopping centre on a boring, rainy Wednesday afternoon change when his successor enters it? Unlikely. His successor may have all sorts of other virtues and be tremendously conscientious and competent, but terribly, it's possible, I don't know, but it might well be rather dull.
This is a man who's not only sort of solipsistic and thinks of himself, but he's easily bored himself. Do you really see him leaving politics, or do you think he's going to carry on, have another go, stick with the game? Because he'd be bored otherwise, I suspect.
Well, he certainly likes danger, and he's very competitive, and he'll want it to show. He'll want to come back, and of course, this is in some ways a traditional figure. Harold Wilson came back, admittedly after losing a general election, being out for 4 years. Churchill came after losing again after losing an election. Disraeli came back. Lots of people have, and he's quite young enough to hope for that. Now, and he's very George. Lloyd George
keep right,
back. Some
and then exit right.
20 or 30 years hoping to come back and never do. So he may be more like Lloyd George. Who knows?
And of course, he would understand all of those historical references and apply them. Andrew Jimson, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Now, there's been lots of conversation in the last few hours about what happens next. And with the British political system, the possibilities are open and complex. Our next guest can hopefully simplify. Jill Rutter is Senior Fellow at the Institute of Government and a former Senior Civil Servant herself. Jill, can I start by reflecting on the very strange nature of this government we now have? I called it a ghost government at the beginning because, any government has to have the support of MPs in Parliament. That's how our system works. This one doesn't. It's a government which can't really do very much.
It's quite interesting because, as you were saying, there's a contrast there with David Cameron resigned after he spectacularly lost his referendum. Theresa May resigned. She couldn't get her Brexit deal through and get her party to back her on Brexit. Boris Johnson actually probably does have majorities for many of his policies. The person who's lost confidence is not the policies, it's the person that's lost confidence. And that's what's really weird about the situation. I think George Freeman was saying why he thought that meant that Boris Johnson, unlike David Cameron and Theresa May, should recognise it, smell the coffee and step down now. So it's quite interesting because in that sense, the government probably could still get its legislation through. Has views changed in the last week on the online safety bill, even on something as controversial as the Northern Ireland Protocol. Have views really changed in the Conservative Party? Probably not. Would they change under a successor? Possibly not. Quite likely not. So I think it's a really different thing now.
So the ship carries on moving, as it were, on the course it was set before, but it just nothing new is going to happen.
Well, that statement you read out that the Cabinet had made about the fact that they'd recognise they shouldn't sort of make major changes in policy direction. I'm not sure those were that much on the cards anyway in the sort of fag end of July. But we were expecting this big economic reset speech.
Well, it's very interesting. He also said, this is Boris Johnson talking to Cabinet today, major fiscal decisions should be left for the next Prime Minister, which I thought was quite a big concession.
And I think that probably means that big economic reset speech, that, remember, that was one of the things that Rishi Sunak resigned over in that letter, which was a bit of a hybrid, a bit of the values. We need to be a proper, competent government. Clear implications, we're not a proper government, we're not governing properly or competently at the moment. But he also said it was impossible to write that joint speech next week because he and the Prime Minister could not agree what the policy is. We've now got a newly installed Chancellor of the Exchequer. Arguably be a bit quick for him to make his mind up on the direction of the economy.
It does seem we're not going to get, as it were, the Boris Johnson view of the economy anytime soon.
That looks right.
As I said earlier on, you're a civil servant yourself. You know the civil service very well. I was talking to people, say this inside the Treasury, or people, new people inside the Treasury and the Cabinet Office over the past 48 hours or so. And there's a really strange feeling for people. They go upstairs or they go along the corridor to the ministerial offices, and there is nobody there. This is taking place right across government. It's a kind of zombie government.
And that's what's the weird thing about this sort of way of losing a Prime Minister. Theresa May had her cabinet pretty much intact when she announced she was standing down, so there were still people at their desks. Because basically Boris Johnson's departure was triggered by this massive resignation event, we have a lot of unfilled jobs. Now, Boris Johnson moved today. You might think, did they move slightly too quickly to fill some of those vacancies in the cabinet and appoint a new Levelling Up secretary, new Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, some of the posts that had been vacated either by resignation or by sacking? But we still have swathes of junior ministers who aren't there. And I think it's a really interesting question. George Freeman, I hate me for using the term junior minister. We have lots of lower-ranking ministers there who actually do a lot of the sort of day-to-day heavy lifting.
That was exactly what I was going to ask you, because we only got that kind of endless rain or cascade of resignations yesterday. Lots of people, including some of my colleagues, were kind of mocking a lot of people, saying, well, who are they really? Minister for this, minister for that, minister for soap-suds, minister for nothing in particular, minister for Kirby grips. They're not really important, but they are important.
They are quite important. I mean, they sign lots of letters to MPs, members of the public, deal with a lot of the casework. We've seen bill committees not meeting in Parliament because there aren't government ministers to go and present the government's case. So legislation is getting held up. So you could argue we have ludicrous numbers of ministers in lower ranks, but we don't know how to run a government without them at the moment.
We've got a very short amount of time remaining. Can I just ask you one thing? Because I think it was George Freeman was making the point that when this happens, when we get this kind of zombie government period, the entire machine can go into some kind of paralysis. In the end, will civil servants keep the show on the road?
They can keep the ship on the road. Northern Ireland went for 3 years with no ministers. You can keep the ship, but you can't change direction. You're not as fast. And one of the big things we're facing is the distraction when a lot of the very senior cabinet members are still in post, but will be very, very distracted by jostling to be Boris Johnson's successor.
It's Jill Rutter. Thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. Now, coming up, our regular weekly Thursday afternoon political panel. Very exciting. And this week, there's rather a lot to discuss. The time now is 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Out with the old, in with the new. Should Boris Johnson leave right now, or is it okay for him to stay until a new leader is elected?
Ian Dale on LBC.
First up in today's tour, a modern masterpiece. The new Italian stack from McDonald's. A carefully crafted burger made with 2 delicious beef patties, mozzarella, and a splash of rich tomato sauce. An edible work of art. And over here in the collection, the exquisite crispy chicken Italiano. Delectable crispy chicken breast paired beautifully with a basil pesto-style sauce. Perfection.
Holiday from home with the McDonald's summer menu. Available until the 26th of July. From 11 a.m, participating restaurants subject to availability.
Everyone's got a Nectar doppelganger, someone that looks like you.
I even shop like you.
And we both know how to make the most of our shopping. The Nectar card.
No, the Nectar app.
Eh? With Nectar you can collect and spend points at Argos and Sainsbury's.
But with the app, there's also personalised discounts and bonus points on products you buy most at Sainsbury's. Plus hundreds of brands to discover and collect points. Like eBay, Esso and Just Eat.
What?
Nectar. Get the app, get more. Personalised discounts require smart shop exclusions apply for full T's and C's. Visit nectar.com/app-terms.
Today's tape begins when Sarah was scrolling through her feed. Suddenly, Sarah heard the scariest sound.
The Wi-Fi is down.
Sarah was trapped by the spinning wheel of doom.
Save yourself from broadband nightmares. Get BT's unbreakable hybrid broadband backed up by EE, the UK's best network. Search BT Hybrid Broadband. 88% UK availability. 4G connection takes up to 175 seconds. Best for mobile network performance. Verify at ee.co.uk/claims.
Hello, Britain. Albert Einstein here. Smart meters are helping people all over the country manage their household budgets. They show how much energy you're using and what it's costing you daily, weekly, and monthly. So, for example, my neighbor Josh might learn he takes too long in the shower, which could even help him reduce how much energy he's using.
For extra help managing your household budgets, search Get a Smart Meter today. Consumer action required. Energy systems and eligibility may vary.
Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
Welcome back, folks. It's 6:50. Now, this has been, no understatement, a political week like no other. It ends with Boris Johnson standing on the steps of Downing Street announcing he has resigned as Conservative leader, though not Prime Minister. So how did we get here and what happens next? Joining me is Caroline Wheeler, who's political editor of the Sunday Times, and Trevor Kavanagh, political columnist at The Sun, who you may remember I was quoting on this programme only a couple of days ago. Welcome to you both. Now, can I start with, I'll start with you, Caroline. Do we know for certain, apart from Steve Baker on the right of the party, who's never held ministerial office, and Suella Braverman, ... do we know anybody else definitely stand?
No, nobody else has actually come out of the traps yet. I mean, we understand that Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, and indeed the Health Secretary Sajid Javid, who resigned spectacularly on Tuesday afternoon, are both considering their position as to whether or not they are going to run. And we will expect, well, I hope very much we will hear more from them over the weekend, she says, hopefully, rubbing her hands together.
Newspaper journalist, yes. Trevor Kavanagh, Rishi Sunak, I would expect Rishi Sunak to run as well. Now, is he the kind of person that might win the backing of The Sun? I know that he's reasonably friendly with your proprietor, Rupert Murdoch, who likes him and admires him.
Oh, yes, I think that Rishi has quite a high rating with us. I mean, he has had some setbacks, and certainly some of them caused by the row with Boris Johnson over spending and taxation. I don't think that he's seriously damaged by things like, for instance, his wife's tax exile status or his green card. I think those have been discounted now. And he's returned, I think, to becoming a serious contender. He does know how the economy runs. We're in the middle of a very, very serious financial crisis, the extent of which we really have not fully encompassed yet. And
good point,
I think probably a safe pair of hands would give him a reasonable flying chance.
I'm going to shamelessly go round potential runners and riders because why not? Let me ask you both about Ben Wallace, because Ben Wallace seems to me to be a very interesting figure. He's close to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, I think, started his own leadership campaign in Ben Wallace's house, but he's a Scot. He was a Scottish member of the Scottish Parliament. He was a military man. He and Boris Johnson have been very, very close over the Iraq War. And in many ways, I suppose he would be the continuity candidate. If you wanted somebody who was going to pick up the same kind of themes as Boris Johnson, but without being Boris Johnson, he'd be the guy. Caroline.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that we gather that he also is very seriously considering running. I think that if you look at the polling that's been done within sort of party members, he has been creeping up the ranks. And
He's actually number one now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's actually topping it, which is something that people kind of look to when they're seriously looking at whether these candidates have a chance. I mean, it's interesting in the kind of betting stakes, Penny Mordaunt is still leading, but in amongst the membership, and of course we have to remember that in this leadership contest, it is the membership that counts, because when we get to those final two candidates, it's the membership that votes on it. And I think you're right. I mean, I think he's had, as many people have said, a good war. The war in Ukraine has sort of catapulted him onto the front pages of many newspapers. He's done many more interviews. I mean, the job of Defence Secretary is sometimes one where you can go many weeks, if not months, not hearing from them. But of course, the war in Ukraine has been absolutely front page news.
Trevor, your readers would quite like a nice, bluff, military, no-nonsense leader, wouldn't they?
I think he would be a favourite, in fact, for many reasons. But there are a couple of factors that need to be taken into account. First of all, he voted Remain, and I think that the division between Brexit and Remain is very deep now within the Conservative Party, and I think has been exacerbated by the way that Boris Johnson's been defenestrated, whether deserving or not. The second thing is that I'm not sure that he's that keen on the job. I mean, it's going to be a poison chalice for whoever takes over. And I understand his real preference would be the job as head of NATO.
Well, we've heard that too. Now, there are so many runners and riders, we can't go through everybody. So I'm going to ask each of you whether there is somebody that you're particularly focusing on as the interesting dark horse, the person who isn't talked about by every single newspaper all the time. Caroline first.
Well, Penny Mordaunt is the one, because she has been a kind of submarine in this contest. I mean, she hasn't made headlines during this reshuffle.
I'm going to ask a really rude question. Why vote for Penny Mordaunt?
Well, I think it's... I've been asking exactly the same question. Backbenchers that I've been speaking to today, some within her camp, and saying, what is it about Penny that you are attracted to? They think that she's very fresh. They think that she's not been tarnished by the scandals that we've seen that's sort of happening regularly within government. She has been sort of slightly, even though she's been a minister, she's been slightly semi-detached from it. They also think that she'll be a kind of no-nonsense, sort of zero-tolerance candidate, somebody that hasn't got skeletons in her closet. There's one particular MP pointed to the fact that she was very active in terms of those debates around the setting up of the grievance scheme, around dealing with some of those sex pests, which of course we must remember is what has triggered this extraordinary week of events. And they seem to be attracted to that notion that she will be the kind of integrity candidate, and that's what the word is that's being bandied around a lot.
Integrity candidate, right. Yeah. Trevor?
Well, I think that, to be honest, and without wanting to be personal, I don't think we need to spend much time on Penny Mordaunt, and I doubt if there's any chance of her becoming the next Prime Minister. The person we do need to watch very closely is Nadhim Zahawi, who may or may not have made a very shrewd move by effectively, as I understand it, demanding the job of Chancellor, although others say he was offered it. What is he up to? I think that being Chancellor, if he's got enough time and has some plans that strike a chord with the voters, he's quite a formidable possibility.
That's very interesting. Now, you talk about we're talking about the process. I began the programme today, Trevor, by trying to get inside Boris Johnson's mind and asking myself, why was he so keen to stay on all summer? Was it about his legacy? Was there going to be some extraordinary dramatic coup halfway through the summer whereby he found a clever, stunning wheeze or dodge to stay in power? And I concluded no. But he has not given up his idea of politics. If there is another Conservative leader, if the Conservative Party, as you speculated in The Sun recently, loses the next election, he might very well still be there but waiting for a further tilt on it.
As a sort of Donald Trump rerun, yes.
Exactly.
A third theory, which I have no idea but have read about, is that he's booked checkers for a wedding party in the next few weeks and doesn't want to go until that's done.
I have heard that too.
I think that, to be honest, I think that he's simply digging in his heels and will want to be winkled out of there by the whips and the party who may even have to change the rules to dislodge him.
Gosh, it's going to be tough right to the end. Caroline, do you agree with that? Do you think there's going to be a final episode yet to be unveiled?
I think it's possible. I mean, we've often thought that this is the end of something, and we've then seen another chapter. I think you're absolutely right. This Chequers party has caused absolute fury.
There's a squeal, a scamper, and the greased pig
they're really angry about it. And backbenchers are saying, this is just typical of this kind of behaviour. And I think there is if you see the letter that Sir John Major has written to the 1922 committee today, effectively asking them to change the rules to make sure that he doesn't stay in office.
Okay, sorry, but to both, this is the final thing we must talk about, which is this notion. I've talked to Conservative peers and MPs about this as well, that in order to speed things up and get Boris out of number 10 faster, basically what the 22 does is engineers the first part of the contest in such a way that one person is way ahead of number 2, and therefore number 1 says to number 2, be my Chancellor, be my Home Secretary, be whatever it is, and we won't put the country through the misery of a full-term contest. This has happened before. In other words, the Conservative Party could truncate things very, very fast, and we could have a new government in about 10 days to 2 weeks' time.
It's always possible, I think.
Theresa May, didn't it?
It happened, quite right. So this is entirely possible. It's been an extraordinary week. You've both been very frank with me and very lucid. There's much more we could talk about. We didn't get onto all the dirty stories. Sorry about that, folks. Make sure you stay tuned into LBC for the rest of the evening. They won't be coming up then either. Coming up at 10, it's Sangeeta Miska, but right now it's Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. This morning, Boris Johnson bowed to the inevitable and resigned his positions as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Several more cabinet ministers had resigned and his position was totally untenable. He then formed a new cabinet and gave a slightly tone-deaf speech outside number 10, where he appeared to blame anyone for his misfortune other than himself. It was almost as if he was inviting us to feel sorry for him. But some are saying he should quit number 10 immediately and not wait for a new leader to be elected. Who would you like to see succeed Boris Johnson? And should it be someone completely new, untainted by the last 3 years? Or is it just Johnson who's been rejected, not his policies?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, the Cabinet has been assured Boris Johnson will stay in office only until his successor is chosen. He announced his resignation outside number 10 earlier, but some Conservatives want an interim Prime Minister installed. Former International Trade Secretary Liam Fox has told Tonight with Andrew Marr why it's right he stays.
Because I think the precedent was set. David Cameron stayed on until his successor, Theresa May, was elected. Theresa May stayed on until her successor, Boris Johnson, was elected. So I think there's a pattern there. There's nothing unusual about it, nothing sinister about it, nor do I think there is likely to be a departure from that precedent.
Former Prime Minister Sir John Major has advised against Boris Johnson remaining in post, calling it unwise. Meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he'll push for a no-confidence vote in Parliament if he's not removed soon. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has told Andrew Marr if the Tories won't act, they will.
Boris Johnson needs to go. He should not be remaining as a caretaker Prime Minister. It's clear that Parliament has lost their confidence in him. And we may well have to force this vote and force Conservatives to choose.
Almost 60 MPs have resigned from their government roles over the past 3 days in the row over former Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher. One of them was Conservative MP for Croydon South, Chris Philp. He's told LBC why he left it until this morning.
I felt some personal loss as the Prime Minister because he had appointed me to his government, and I think you need to demonstrate some reciprocal loyalty. And he had won a significant general election mandate in 2019. In addition to that, I was personally working on some quite important areas of work, and I felt I had a duty to carry on with that work. But there came a point when the wider considerations around ethics and integrity and the constitutional issues outweighed everything else.
A timeline for a leadership contest within the Conservative Party will be revealed next week. Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab and former Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove have already ruled themselves out. LBC's political editor in Scotland, Gina Davidson, has been talking to MPs on College Green. She says Rishi Sunak is likely to throw his hat in.
It's believed that he's holed up in a hotel room in London, already plotting how he's going to attack this leadership campaign, and it's likely he will have the backing of a lot of people in the party. But he does have that whole scandal of his wife being a non-dom still hanging over him. That wasn't that long ago. And interestingly, of course, the Prime Minister came out to bat for him at that point, and Rishi Sunak has repaid him by urging the Prime Minister to go.
Attorney General Suella Braverman and Brexiteer Steve Baker have both indicated they will also run. Also this evening, the mother of baby P, who died after months of abuse, has been released from prison. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son. The parole board approved her release and rejected an appeal against the decision by Justice Secretary Dominic Raab. Ghislaine Maxwell has officially lodged an appeal against her conviction and sentence in the US for sex trafficking. The 60-year-old was found guilty of luring young girls for convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison in New York last month. And BA check-in staff at Heathrow have called off a planned strike in the summer holidays. No exact dates have been given, but they were unhappy a pay cut they got during the pandemic hadn't been reversed. We're told they've now been given a better offer. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 81 points at 71.89. The pound buys $1.20 and €1.17. LBC weather staying dry for most tonight. A few light spells of rain lingering in northwest Scotland. Lows of 11. Warm sunshine tomorrow for southern and eastern parts. Cloudier in the northwest with the odd spot of drizzle for western Scotland. Highs of 26 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 4 minutes past 7 on LBC. Well, it's not very often a Prime Minister resigns. When I think about it in my time at LBC, how many Prime Ministerial resignations have I witnessed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this might be the 6th, or is it the 5th? So, however you look at it, when a Prime Minister leaves office, it is a momentous occasion. Whether you supported that Prime Minister, whether you've opposed that Prime Minister, it's one of those occasions that we probably remember quite a bit into the future. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember, well actually I can remember where I was when I heard that Boris Johnson had resigned. I'm going to be completely honest with you, I hadn't woken up. It's the after effects of COVID, you see. I wake up very, very late, so I kind of missed all of the action this morning, which I'm still rather gutted about. But the Prime Minister resigned, and it was almost inevitable. You think about the events of yesterday, and then Brandon Lewis did resigned this morning. Simon Hart, the Welsh Secretary, resigned. There were a few other more minor resignations as well. And the writing was on the wall for Boris Johnson. So I don't think he had much alternative but to do what many people think he should have done many, many days, if not weeks ago. So, what happened then? Well, he had to form a new cabinet, because even though you resign as Prime Minister, you are still acting Prime Minister, you're still head of the government until a new leader of the Conservative Party, until a new Prime Minister is elected. So he got on and reformed his cabinet. Some slightly bizarre appointments in that, which you may want to talk about a little bit down the line this evening. And then he gave what can only be described as a bizarre speech in Downing Street. He seemed to veer off script quite a lot. There was some, I suppose, typical Borisisms within the speech, talking about herd mentality, really blaming everyone for his departure but himself. But he is going to go, despite what the likes of John Major or other people seem to think. He is not in control of events now. He has resigned, and that is it. He stays in position until a successor is elected. But it's only until then. All these people who are coming up with these sort of Trumpian theories about how he's going to try and cling to power and effectively won't go, even though he says he will. Dominic Cummings being the latest one, John Major another one. I'm sorry, they don't seem to understand the Conservative Party leadership election rules, because once the leader resigns, all the power is then invested in the 1922 committee. They control events, they control the timetable, in consultation with the Conservative Party National Union. So whatever suspicions people might have about Boris Johnson's motivations, he is going to be gone. And he could be gone within 2 weeks, because the way the party leadership election rules work is that the MPs whittle down the list to 2, and then those 2 are put to the party membership. But it may well be the case that doesn't even happen. That the second one, if they're far enough behind the leading one, they might just say, OK, well, I'm not going to go to the membership. So we could have a new Prime Minister in 2 weeks' time. It's entirely possible. I think that's not the most likely prospect, but it could be within 2 weeks. Well, I've taken you through some of the events of the day. Let's cross to Ollie Barrett, LBC's political correspondent. Ollie, just take us through some of the other main events of the day, because it has, given that the Prime Minister's resigned, been quite a momentous day.
It's been quite a momentous day, Ian, and it started early for everyone, because we had a couple of resignations before 7 a.m. this morning, including Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, and it was clearly becoming clear to Boris Johnson at that point, and his critics would say it should have been clearer to him earlier, that the arithmetics simply weren't there for him anymore. He was going to have real trouble running any kind of functional government. So through the morning, we started to get word that Boris Johnson did intend to resign today, and then we were waiting for that statement outside Downing Street. We saw members of his family, staff, some MPs gathering outside Downing Street for that statement, which he delivered and confirmed that he would be staying in place until the next leader was chosen by the Conservative Party. Some critics in the Tory party about the lack of contrition in the speech. Others said it was well judged. We also know that Boris Johnson spoke to the Queen during the day to inform her about the resignation that is taking place. There have been various Conservative voices through the day that have said that they are uncomfortable with the idea of Boris Johnson being in Downing Street until the next leader gets into place. But he's also been holding cabinet, that new reshuffled temporary cabinet with names like James Cleverly as Education Secretary for the interim, for example, Robert Buckland back in the cabinet as well. And Boris Johnson told cabinet that he wouldn't be bringing forward any new legislation. He'd simply be trying to move forward the agenda of the existing government that he has been the head of, and saying there would be no major fiscal interventions until the new leader was in place. And then, as you were saying, it's really now all eyes on the 1922 committee to tell us next week the exact details of how the leadership process and contest is going to play out to get that new person into Downing Street to take over from Boris Johnson.
Ollie, thank you very much. That's Ollie Barrett, LBC's political correspondent. Well, all the tin-hatted conspiracy theorists, they've been out in force today, and here's another one of them who's texted into the programme. It's not suspicions, it's likely. Johnson has not resigned, he's just talking about it. What do you think he said to the Queen when he rang her up this evening? Oh, just rang for a chat, Your Majesty. He has resigned. He is leaving office. So if you've got any intention of bombarding me over the next 3 hours with mad conspiracy theory texts like that, save yourselves the trouble, because I won't be reading them out, I can assure you. We are going to come to your calls. In fact, we're going to do a lot of calls this evening, because I'm sure a lot of you have got a lot of things you want to get off your chest one way or the other. Let's start off in this hour by talking about whether Boris Johnson should, in fact, stay until a new leader is elected, or whether he should go now, as John Major is suggesting. And then we'll move on to what happens then. Do you think that there should be a vote of confidence? That's what Keir Starmer is probably going to call for. I can't really see the point in that, because all he does then is unite the Tory party. Why would he do that unless he didn't know what he was doing? Second of all, is this just a rejection of Boris Johnson, or is it a rejection of Conservative policy? Because there is a school of thought that says, well, just because you get rid of the party leader, that doesn't mean to say you get rid of all the policies, and there should be continuity of policy. Now, personally, to my mind, if you're going to change the party leader, you need to have root and branch change. Otherwise, what's the point of it all? So I'd be quite interested to hear your view on that. But personalities are, contrary to what Tony Benn used to say, personalities are important in politics. It's not just about policies, it is about personalities. And we are going to get a new leader over the course of the next few weeks. Who do you think that should be? 0345 6060 973. Well, earlier I spoke to Matt Hancock, the Conservative MP for West Suffolk, who of course was Health Secretary under Boris Johnson and his predecessor Theresa May. I began by asking if it was right for Boris Johnson to stay on as Prime Minister rather than an interim.
Well, it's entirely normal for the Prime Minister to stay on in these circumstances. We need to make sure that we continue governing the country, whilst, importantly, there has to be an election now, which is all about the future direction of the country. And that's what we're going to have. And meanwhile, the pressing things that need to be addressed are all about making sure, for instance, that we keep working on tackling Putin, which is an area where Boris Johnson has been very, very strong.
Did you want him to go?
Well, I think it's very sad that it's come to this. I think it's very sad, but ultimately he lost the confidence of his cabinet, and what matters now is that we have a new leader, a new Prime Minister who can unite North and South and can get votes from the so-called Red Wall and Blue Wall.
What do you make of the fact that we have an Attorney General who went on television last night to tout herself as a future leader of the party, telling the Prime Minister he should go without actually quitting herself, and you have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who accepted the job from the Prime Minister one day and then 24 hours later marched into his office and told him he must go, and yet he's still Chancellor of the Exchequer. How is this sustainable, and what is your message to your two colleagues?
Well, it's obviously very unusual circumstances. What matters now is the debate about the future and the next Prime Minister. And I think what's critical is that we have somebody who can appeal to the wide, broad Conservative family. And that is the critical thing that we've got to have now. Now, obviously, the last 48 hours have been unusual. But Boris Johnson has resigned, and now we've got to make sure that we have somebody who can really deliver, somebody who's competent and serious and can get on with the job of governing. And the critical thing, and I think the most important thing, is that we have somebody who can unite and bring the party together and deliver for people living all over the United Kingdom, north and south.
And who is that person?
Well, I haven't decided yet who I'm going to be supporting.
Come on, you know who they all are.
Only one person.
Hang on, there are 22, I've calculated, there are 22 different runners and riders. You've served in Parliament with all of them. You must know which one you think is most likely to fulfil the criteria that you've just set out.
Well, I don't know, actually, because firstly, I don't know exactly who's going to run.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Sorry, Matt, but that's utterly preposterous. Either you think it should be somebody who's a former senior cabinet minister like Rishi Sunak or Sajid Javid, or somebody who should be a completely new broom. I mean, it's not difficult to work out, is it?
Well, I do think it needs to be somebody with experience, yes. I think it's important to have sat in cabinet, for instance, if you're not coming from opposition. And so I do think that's part of it, yes.
But if Damien Green can say that he thinks it should be a completely new broom like Tom Tugendhat, you clearly don't think that. Why is it that after all of the weeks and months of speculation, you still can't tell us who you think the next Prime Minister should be? Because you're going to have to fairly soon, aren't you?
Yeah, of course, and I'm very happy to come on the show and tell you when I got to that point. But the Prime Minister has only resigned at lunchtime, and here we are in the early evening. So, it's there's time to see, who declares? Nobody other than Suella Braverman has formally declared yet. But what matters to me is that it is somebody who can appeal to all parts of the Conservative family and that broad church that we need in order to be able to govern effectively.
So can I take it as read you won't be backing Suella Braverman?
Well, you could take it that I think it needs to be somebody who can appeal right across the broad Conservative movement and appeal, to traditional Conservative voters and people who are voting Conservative for the first time and were doing that in 2019, which was something, obviously, Boris was very, very effective at garnering that new support. So yeah, you can. I'm not going to name names, but I do care deeply.
Okay.
That we get somebody who can make sure that we're in a position to win the next election, because the risks to the country of a Starmer-Sturgeon deal of whatever kind is incredibly grave, and we need to make sure that we can have that very broad appeal again.
Do you think part of the problem is, though, that there is probably nobody who can fulfil all the criteria that you set there, because there will be people like Jeremy Hunt, for example, who came a creditable second last time, who clearly does want to have another run at the job, but he's regarded with huge suspicion by people on the ultra-Brexit side of the party, just as Steve Baker, for example, would be regarded with the same kind of suspicion by people on the Jeremy Hunt wing of the party. It's a party out of control. It's a party that's going to be almost impossible to unite, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, because the programme that was essentially set out in the manifesto in 2019 obviously proved very popular in that election, and we've got to deliver it. And there's quite a lot of unanimity around that. Of course, there's always debate at the sides, but making sure that we deliver on that agenda is really important, and was effective in doing what I think we need to do for the next election too, which is appeal not just to traditional Conservative voters, but to a broad church, including the people who voted Conservative for the first time before.
So
in 2019.
same agenda, different personality. That I'm reading between the lines there, but that's almost what you're saying. That's not going to cut it either with the electorate, is it? They will want to see a meaningful change, not just in personnel.
Well, I don't think, actually, there's been a rejection of the agenda, of the policy platform. And I think, of course, it'll need to evolve for the future, for the, to cast forward, especially as clearly Brexit has now been delivered, and now it's about delivering the opportunities that come from that. For instance, it needs to be refreshed after 5 years, especially, a pretty tough few years, including the pandemic and the war. So obviously it has to be refreshed, but the broad thrust of it, making sure that it's appealing both to people who, essentially free market conservatives and conservatives who've been traditionally supporting us for a long time, plus those new voters. I think making sure that we can have a leader who can appeal to both is incredibly important.
I've just been told Grant Shapps is apparently considering a run. You served in cabinet with him. What are his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, he's a very, very effective administrator. He's a very effective communicator, and I don't know if he's running or not. But let's wait until we see all the declarations and then talk about individuals.
Not a ringing endorsement, then.
How do you mean? Well, I'm going to wait until I
just
see
asked you for
all
his strengths and weaknesses. I wasn't asking you to vote for him. I just wondered, you've served in cabinet with him. You've seen these people up close far more than I have. What are his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, he's as I said, he's very good administrator, right? He's run the transport department very effectively. He's a very good communicator. He's a real team player. I worked incredibly closely with him, especially during the pandemic. But there's going to be, as you say, a huge number of people put their name forward. But what matters for now, before we've had a broad swathe of declarations, and I don't know whether Grant is declared or whether there's just a rumour of that. The point is that it's what the next Prime Minister stands for is important, as well as who, and that's what I'm setting out now.
Is there any part of you over the last 24 hours that's thought, well, if things had turned out differently, I would have been a contender now?
No, I'm not going to be running. I'm not going to be running, but I care a lot about...
You know what I mean? That if you hadn't resigned, if you'd still been in the cabinet now, you would have been seen by most people as somebody who would have been a leading contender. And, I mean, just psychologically, that must affect you.
Well, I'm not standing, so it's just a matter of fact, I guess. You can spend your whole life thinking about alternatives, but there's no point in that. There's a practical question right now, though, of who should be the next Prime Minister. But crucially, before people have declared, the question is, what do they need to stand for? And that's what I think is so important.
OK, Matt Hancock, thank you very much. And that was Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary. Lee says, Ian, that interview shows exactly what kind of person we don't need as PM. Aren't we all sick of MPs who skirt around the issues and never give a straight answer, clearly hedging his bets to hope for a return to government? Clean sweep needed, Penny Mordaunt or Tobias Ellwood needed to step up. Well, it won't be Tobias Ellwood. I think he ruled himself out of running on Tom Swarbrick's show this morning on LBC. But I have drawn up a list of 22 different possible runners and riders in the Tory leadership contest. We might talk about a few of those a little bit later. We'll come to your calls as well. 0345 6060 973. It's 22 minutes past 7.
Follow all the fallout from the Prime Minister's resignation here on LBC.
Meet Charlie. She loves dogs.
Guilty.
From Wookiees to Treatos, she powers her pup empire with Shopify.
The sales won't stop.
With Charlie's tech needs sorted, she can focus on turning her home business into a global operation. From in-store to social, connect with customers wherever and whenever, so they don't go barking up the wrong tree. Yes, boy, join Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses worldwide.
And then continue.
This is possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a free 14-day trial at shopify.co.uk/free trial 22. Go to shopify.co.uk/free trial 22 to start selling online today.
Are you searching for peace and purpose in life, and you're not quite sure what to do or where to go?
Franklin Graham.
July the 16th, I'm going to be in London at the Excel Center. So come down, let's talk about it. We're going to have a lot of music. There's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm going to share a message of hope for everybody, and everyone is welcome. So I want to invite you to the Excel Center in London, July the 16th.
Details at godlovesyoutour.org.uk.
See you there.
How can I get a beach it, pool it, can't believe it, bucket list it, try it, dance it, boss it, love it, sun and sand it, city streets it, got it, flaunt it, swim it, surf it, lounge it, live it, OMG it, snap it, share it, never forget it kind of holiday?
Don't just book it, Thomas Cook it.
You need Thomas Cook, my friend. With tons of choice online and up to £100 off your holiday, what's stopping you?
Don't just book it, Thomas Cook it.
Visit thomascook.com and use offer code COOKIT100. Adult protected, minimum spend applies. Book by July 17th, subject to availability and conditions apply.
Whoa, cool, I've got to get my phone.
If your dog suddenly decides to jump on your skateboard, you won't miss a thing. Because on the brand new Pets in a Pickle website, it's now even quicker and easier to get your dog covered. So, for pet insurance policies as unique as they are, visit the brand new petsinApickle.co.uk.
Leading Britain's conversation. Ian Dale. Tweet at LBC.
24 minutes past 7. We'll come to your calls in a moment. First, Stephen Hammond joins us, Conservative MP for Wimbledon, former Health Minister. Stephen, very good evening to you. Your reaction to the day's events?
Well, Ian, they've been the most extraordinary 3 days and 24 hours that I've seen ever in politics. I've been a Member of Parliament for 17 years. I've seen several leadership crises, but the one that we've seen unfold since the Tuesday night resignations of Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak has probably been the most extraordinary living history.
So what should happen now? Because some people are saying that Boris Johnson should now quit Number 10, leave office immediately rather than wait until a new leader's elected. What's your view on that?
My view is that the party should accelerate the process. It is quite tricky constitutionally to have a